The table was set just the way I liked it. Nothing fancy, just warm. Candles flickered low, casting a soft glow over the plates. I had cooked his favorite, the rosemary chicken that made him smile that first fall we spent together. I even found the old playlist we danced to after our wedding. It was our anniversary. I wanted it to feel like us, honest, simple, real. The box was small, wrapped in gold paper I'd saved from a Christmas long ago. It felt personal, more than anything I could have bought in a store. I'd spent weeks on it. A bracelet, understated but meaningful, engraved with the coordinates of where we first met, and the day our lives quietly intertwined. My fingers trembled a little when I handed it to him. I wasn't nervous, just hopeful. He opened it. He looked down, blinked. Then, he laughed. Actually laughed. Seriously? That's it? That's what you're giving me? I blinked, frozen. He wasn't joking. He held it like it was a paperclip, said it looked cheap, embarrassing. I felt the warmth drain from my face, but I didn't say a word. I just smiled. Or something close to it. But something inside me shifted. He went on eating like nothing had happened, made some offhand comment about a coworker's Rolex gift, then turned the TV on while I cleared the table. I kept thinking, was it really so laughable? I wasn't trying to impress him with money. I was trying to remind him of us. Of where we began. Who we were when things felt true. But I realized something else. Maybe he didn't miss that version of us. Maybe he never really saw it. Back when we first met, I never brought up where I came from. Not because I was hiding it, but because I wanted to be chosen for me, not the name behind me. Richard always assumed I was just sweet, soft-spoken, someone who grew up with little and was easy to please. I let him think that. I watched him misread me, year after year, believing I was lucky to have him. But in that moment, as he chewed and laughed at the TV, I saw the truth. It wasn't about the gift. Not really. It was about the way he dismissed it, the way he dismissed me. That bracelet carried more than coordinates. It carried care, memory, intention. And he laughed. I stood at the sink, hands in warm water, heart somewhere far colder. That night, I didn't cry. I just listened to the sound of the dishwasher and made a quiet decision. One I wouldn't speak aloud. Not yet. The house was quiet after he went to bed. I stayed in the living room, lights low, that little bracelet resting on my palm. I turned it over again and again, like I was trying to make sense of it. But it wasn't the bracelet that needed understanding. It was him. Or maybe it was me. Finally seeing what I hadn't wanted to see. How long had I mistaken silence for peace? Dismissiveness for humor? I thought about the years, the birthdays, the holidays, the small celebrations where I brought meaning and he brought presents. Just enough to check a box. I used to tell myself he wasn't cold, just distracted. Not cruel, just tired. But his laughter that night, sharp, careless, wasn't the sound of a tired man. It was the sound of someone who never looked closely enough to know when something came from the heart. I placed the bracelet in my keepsake drawer, not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted to remember how it felt to give something real, and how it felt to have it tossed aside. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was no longer naive. The celebration may have been humble, but the storm that followed? That would be anything but. The days that followed were quiet, on the surface. Richard went back to his routines as if nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek in the morning, scrolled through his phone at dinner, laughed too loudly at his own stories. I smiled when expected, nodded when necessary. But inside, something had awakened. A part of me I hadn't called on in years. Not since before I chose to leave that world behind. I was raised with linen napkins, old paintings, and stories that came with land deeds. My grandfather's hands built companies. My grandmother's letters built legacy. I never wore the wealth loudly. It clung to me in posture, in calm, in knowing I never had to ask. But when I married Richard, I wanted something different. I wanted love that saw me without the weight of a last name. So I kept the estate separate, never mentioned the foundation, never corrected him when he called me just a small-town girl. He never asked. He assumed. And I let him. For years, I chose the quiet life. I planted herbs. I thrifted. I stitched together birthdays with charm instead of credit cards. But after that night, after he laughed, I stopped seeing modesty as grace. I started seeing it as a shield, one that he'd mistaken for smallness. And I wasn't interested in being mistaken anymore. I called the family lawyer the next morning. A quiet voice, Mr. Langston had handled our affairs for decades. Births, deaths, trusts, transitions. He didn't ask questions, just scheduled the meeting. I wore navy slacks, a silk blouse, and the pearl earrings my mother left me. The receptionist greeted me like I'd never been gone. I signed in under my maiden name, not to hide, but to remember who I was before I shrank. We went over documents I hadn't touched since before I met Richard. The original prenup, untouched, generous. The trust agreements. Real estate holdings I had forgotten I technically still owned. My name glowed on every page. Elena Margaret Wells. I felt the weight of it settle back on my shoulders like a tailored coat I hadn't worn in years. Langston adjusted his glasses and asked gently, "Is it time, Miss Wells?" I looked him in the eye. Yes, it is. No anger in my voice, no drama, just clarity. I wasn't punishing Richard. I was protecting the version of myself I'd almost let disappear. There's something about being laughed at when you're offering love. It rewires you, strips away fantasy. What I gave him was real. What he gave back? Dismissal wrapped in arrogance. So now, I was giving him something else. A final gift. One he'd never expect. That night, I sat at the kitchen table while Richard showered upstairs, steam fogging the mirror I'd wiped clean 1,000 times. I laid out the documents one by one, carefully, methodically. The revised estate terms. A declaration of separate assets. A clause that protected every inch of what I had built before and after him. I didn't do it out of bitterness. I did it because I finally saw the cost of making myself small. He had always believed we were equals because I never asked for more. But now, I understood. He didn't see me as equal. He saw me as less. Someone to entertain, to charm, to keep around because I was sweet, quiet, and never asked difficult questions. But I had questions now, and answers too. Ones written in ink, notarized and sealed, ready to change the rules of this entire game. I didn't leave the documents out just yet. I had one more detail to add, one more signature to finalize. The gift he had laughed at would be the last thing he ever underestimated. Because what comes next? Well, let's just say Richard was about to open a box that would redefine everything he thought he knew about the woman he married. He walked through the door at 6:17 p.m., same as always. Jacket on one arm, briefcase in the other, keys landing in the bowl by the door with that familiar metallic clink. I was already gone. But the lights were on, and the kitchen table was waiting for him, just like I always made sure it was. Except this time, instead of dinner, there was a small white box. No ribbon, just a handwritten note propped against it. "You didn't like my last gift," it read. "So I brought you 2 more. He smirked. I know him well enough to picture it. Thought it was a joke. Probably expected something sentimental again. A second attempt at softness. He wouldn't realize until he opened the box that softness was no longer on the menu. He pulled the lid off and saw it. His wedding ring. tucked neatly in a velvet pouch. His smile faded. Then came the papers, clean, professional, devastating. A new legal agreement, signed and witnessed, outlining the irrevocable severance of any claim he might have once had to my estate. Every line a quiet strike, every clause a mirror. And beneath it all, in its own sealed envelope, were the divorce papers. Signed by me. My handwriting in black ink where promises used to live. His laugh, once careless and loud, was now replaced by a silence he couldn't fill. He sat down slowly, like the weight of the chair wasn't enough to hold what had just landed on him. I imagine his hands shaking slightly as he flipped through the pages, each one confirming this wasn't a prank or a warning. It was final. It was real. His eyes scanning for loopholes, for a hint that this could be undone. But there weren't any. I'd made sure of that, with the same care I once used to wrap his gifts. What stung more, I think, was the realization that he had never known me. Not truly. He saw my kindness as lack, my warmth as weakness. He mistook my quiet nature for submission. But those documents told another story, one about a woman who could build empires and walk away from them too. A woman who watched, learned, and waited, until the day she decided to reclaim her voice, in ink and in silence. Maybe he remembered that dinner now. The gift he mocked. The moment my eyes dropped, but my mind stood tall. I had given him one last chance to see me, and he laughed. So this time, I gave him something he couldn't laugh at. Not because it cost more, but because it cost him everything. I had included one last page, brief but impossible to ignore. It was a letter, not poetic, not angry, just honest. I told him I used to believe love was about giving, even when you got little back. That I thought being kind would teach someone how to be gentle, too. But kindness without respect is just self-erasure. And I wasn't willing to erase myself anymore. Not for him. Not for anyone. I left the house that morning without looking back. My bags weren't heavy. Most of the weight I'd carried wasn't physical. It was emotional. Years of holding up a man who never once asked if I needed holding too. As I drove away, I didn't cry. I felt still. Strong. Like I had just stepped out of a costume I forgot I was wearing. One stitched together with patience, hope, and shrinking expectations. Richard would sit there for hours, I imagine, with everything spread out in front of him, symbols of what he lost, not just in wealth, but in substance. And when he finally stood up, alone in that quiet house, maybe he'd realize the irony. The woman he laughed at? She'd just handed him the most powerful thing she ever owned, her absence. The calls started the next day. First just 1, then 4, then 12. Voicemails filled with stammering, disbelief, and frantic explanations. It was a joke, Elena. You're overreacting. Come on, it was just a bracelet. The more he spoke, the smaller his words became. Like he was realizing, too late, that he wasn't just apologizing for a laugh. He was apologizing for years of looking at love and seeing something disposable. I didn't block his number. I let the phone ring. Because silence sometimes is louder than any scream. I think he expected tears, maybe anger, maybe a dramatic scene. But I didn't owe him a storm. What I owed myself was peace. The kind that comes when you stop begging to be seen and start choosing to walk away. He didn't know how to process that. Most men like him don't. He showed up at my sister's house once, unannounced, said he just wanted to talk like adults. She didn't let him in, said I wasn't there. He stood outside looking lost. My sister told me his eyes were glassy, like he couldn't believe the ground had actually shifted. That the woman he once called sweet but forgettable had become untouchable. And no amount of backpedaling could put her back in his reach. He tried appealing to the past, sent photos of us from better days, Vacations, birthdays. That blurry one from our first apartment when the sink overflowed and we laughed for hours. But the memories didn't move me. Not because they weren't real, but because I was the one holding them up all along. His version of us had always been curated through comfort, through what I gave. Now, stripped of that, all he saw was his own reflection, and it terrified him. The apology texts got longer, more desperate. "You were right," one said. "I didn't see how much you carried." Another one read, "I should have told you I was proud of you more." But the truth is, if a man only realizes your value once he's lost the benefits of it, it's not clarity, it's panic. He wasn't mourning me. He was mourning the version of his life I made easier, warmer, more whole. I spoke to him once, just once. He asked me why I was doing this. His voice cracked, soft, like the man I thought I married. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list his mistakes. I simply said, "You thought I was small because my gift wasn't expensive. Turns out it was the only thing in this house not bought by me." Then I hung up. And with that, the final thread between us unraveled. It didn't take long for the story to ripple out. Friends noticed I wasn't wearing my ring. Colleagues of his whispered in offices and lifted their eyebrows over coffee breaks. His own sister reached out to me, not to take sides, but to say she always wondered why I seemed to disappear in photos, why he never really bragged about me the way he bragged about deals and golf scores. The silence grew heavier for him. Not just mine, but everyone else's. Because when a man mocks love, and the world sees the aftermath, they start looking closer. They remember the way he talked over her. They notice how often she gave and how little she got back. And slowly, respect begins to rot. One colleague told me later, he lost something in their eyes, not because he was left, but because he laughed. And that laugh, oh, that laugh, echoed longer than he ever thought it would. He stopped calling eventually. I think shame has a weight that exhaustion can't outrun. But I still imagine him sometimes, sitting in that house with its polished kitchen and spotless counters, surrounded by things bought with money he never questioned. And none of it can touch him, because the one thing that once gave all of it meaning was never for sale. And now, it's gone. The air feels different now. Lighter. Like I exhaled something I didn't realize I'd been holding in for years. I moved into a place with wide windows and morning light that spills across the floor like honey. No heavy footsteps. No tension between silence and small talk. Just peace. And the hum of a woman finally living for herself. Not as someone's wife. Not as someone's quiet support system. Just Elena, whole and visible. I started a foundation in my mother's name. Something she always dreamed of, but never got the chance to do. We fund women-owned startups and scholarships for girls from towns like mine. The irony isn't lost on me. I gave so much to a man who couldn't see value in sentiment. And now, I spend my days investing in meaning. In women who give not to be praised, but because it's in their bones to build something real. I travel when I want. I sit at cafes and people watch without needing to rush home and reheat leftovers. I meet new people, but I don't lead with who I was married to. I don't need to. My story no longer orbits around him. It spirals outward, brighter, fuller. I am not bitter. I am not broken. I am simply better. Not because he left, but because I finally arrived in a life that was waiting for me all along. Sometimes I hear about him, through mutual friends, or an article someone sends without context. He's still working the same job, still dining at the same restaurants, still making noise where silence would have served him better. But there's a dullness to his name now. No edge, no admiration. Just a man who laughed at love and never learned how to rebuild it. Reputation once cracked doesn't shine again. It splinters. I don't wish him pain, truly. That would mean I still carried him in my heart. and I don't. What I carry now are softer things: the scent of books in the morning, the sound of waves when I visit the coast, the joy of being around people who listen, really listen, who laugh not at, but with. There's something sacred about building a life from your own hands, no matter how long it takes to start. The funny part is, I still give gifts. Thoughtful ones, quiet ones, the kind that say, "I see you." Last month, I gave my assistant a handwritten letter and a tiny silver charm for her bracelet. She cried, said no one had ever paid attention like that before. And in that moment, I smiled. Not because I was proud, but because I remembered. A real gift isn't about the cost. It's about what it holds. It happened just last week. I gave someone a gift. Small, wrapped in brown paper, nothing grand. Inside was a hand-bound notebook, pages stitched with care, the first line written in gold ink. "For everything you haven't said yet." When they opened it, their eyes softened. They held it like it was something sacred. And they said the words he never did. "This means everything." No laughter, no mockery, just presence. And in that moment, I felt the full circle of it all. The woman who once stood quiet beside a man who dismissed her heart, now stood centered in her own story, no longer shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. It wasn't about revenge. It was about return. Returning to myself, my worth, my voice. I didn't have to scream it. I just had to live it.